Hi everybody, this is the March 2024 Trusted Advisors meeting of CNBC here in Central North Carolina. And this morning's teaching is going to be one that I want you all to apply across all your communications you're going to have with people, simply put, because it's growing its importance and the amount of ignorance trumps the amount of knowledge. So we're going to jump into it. The title is, How Do We Engage as Christians in a World That AI is Reshaping? So notice the verb choice I used in the lesson, is reshaping. This is a present continuous tense. It was happening before you got here, it's happening while we're here, and it's going to continue to happen after you left. This isn't an event in time, like Y2K. This is a process for which you are a participating member therein. As I shared with some of you, I have AI in my house for which I do not fully understand, but I know what it's doing. So I have Netflix. When I pick something on Netflix and I'm scrolling through, I know that their algorithm is looking at what I'm looking at. And they're making recommendations for me based on stuff that I've previously watched. They're seeing me skip over things rather quickly, and they're realizing that that genre, that actor, that actress isn't my cup of tea, and I don't get to see that anymore. It's very subtle, and it's important, and it's a kind of artificial intelligence that we can think of as relatively non-intrusive. Oh, by the way, it is, because that information is being used to make decisions about other things in my life. And we need to go hacking through all of it. So I decided to list on the board 6 different stories to talk about 8 different points in AI. So I have a sheet in front of you. You're going to have 8 different points we're going to discuss, and I want each of you to have some stories that you can use to recall with people.
Who the guy guys like?
Lakester, right there. I want you to have stories that you can use to make your point and not be very theoretical, right? So what I'm doing right now is theoretical, but we got to break it down into some stories. And so I read an article in Franklin Graham's magazine about artificial intelligence, and one of the speakers in there brought to my attention some of the facts of artificial intelligence that kind of justified me thinking this is something we want to talk about as a group. So let's just jump right into it. Anybody, what's the word intelligence? I know it's hard to just jump right in with an answer to that, right? What does intelligence mean to you?
Superior information.
So a thicker encyclopedia would be intelligence than a thinner one?
Because
that would meet your definition.
Not bigger, just...
Anybody else want to throw in a definition? Phil, you got one? What's our intelligence to you?
The ability to learn or understand or deal with new or trying situations.
Understand and deal with.
So that's pretty much describes what's going through now with all the advances in technology. It was 59 years, and Wilbur and Orville were throwing a balsa wood airplane up and killed up whales, and then 59 years later, Neil Armstrong's wide on the moon, supposedly.
Yes. So our de facto conspiracy theory guy immediately laughed because that sort of commentary is too common not to ignore. You can't just pretend that doesn't exist, Scott.
Nobody's mentioned anything about accuracy in intelligence. I think this is
It doesn't mention it in accuracy.
well. I think it should. That's my point.
It's fascinating. So can you think of an example where not including that has been a problem?
Well, take recently Google's been under fire for building their AI on woke items, and George Washington is a black man. That kind of thing. When you show me a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware or whatever, and shows a black man with silver hair.
So one of the items about any kind of intelligence is that it should not unwind something for which you have evidence. So if I hold a quarter in my hand and AI looks at that and runs an algorithm and says that's a nickel, we should intuitively know to say the evidence trumps the output, because evidence is more important. That's why witnesses do more in a court suit than any documentation ever can. When somebody says, I watched them hit the guy, versus no marks on the car, the person who says, I saw it with my own 2 eyes, is more trusted, because we all know as a culture, evidence trumps fact. They should be the same, but we don't treat them that way. So let's start with some of the basics about intelligence in the world that we live. Let's go to the very first place where we find technology, because technology and artificial intelligence are very blurred. The very first place we find this diatribe, there's this dialectic between the two, and that's in the book of Genesis. And that's this concept of the wheel. So let me just ask you generically, what was the promise of a wheel, and what is the threat posed by having wheels? What's the promise of having a wheel as part of society?
It'll make our efficiency work easier.
In what way? Transportation's number one, correct. But it also changed agricultural processing, right? A grinding wheel, we're able to process corn into flour much easier. It took us from hunting and gathering societies to being an agrarian society. No wheel, that doesn't work, right? You gotta have wheels. What's the threat of wheels?
Makes you lazy.
Potentially, we can use laziness. And we're going to escalate that with the Wall-E story. What technology can cause in laziness form.
Well, you look at like a windmill. That's a big wheel driven by wind. The ground grain and to pump water out into fields.
What's the potential risk from a biblical perspective of the wheel?
You depend on the wheel more than you do God.
There you go, right there. It creates a sense of self-righteousness, indignation. It's the Tower of Babel on a microscopic scale, right? You're doing, what can I do without God, right? But it's also making it easier for you to get toward really things that are really bad. We all know, without giving you a monologue on it, the internet has made us make decisions quicker and more accurately than perhaps any tool we've ever had. It's also made forays into gambling addictions, sexual addictions, poor decision making, relationship ruining, name calling easier than ever. So in one sense, it's the most destructive tool we've ever created. And simultaneously, it's created more freedom than any tool we've ever created. And that's going to jump right to question number 5 on our list for you to fill in the blank. All technology comes with a blank and a blank. So what are the two things that come with all technology?
Positive and negative.
You can. It is true that you could break it down into something as generic as that, but I would say a better answer would be a promise and a threat. The threat that comes with technology is it leads us to sin quicker. So think through now. All of your answers can kind of meet there. Scott referenced laziness. That represents a form of sin, the concept of sloth. And that's what happens in a lot of these stories. It also leads us to all the thou shalt nots of the book of Exodus, right? All those become easier with technology. Thou shalt not steal. Well, heck, if I can steal from you using a cell phone and get into your bank account, if I can get your username and password, well, I couldn't have done that if you didn't have online banking. So a lot of those sins that are referenced in Exodus now become easier because of the technologies we have as well. So the limitation here, and this is part of your argument that I want you to have as you go into the community, is technology is wonderful. It creates freedom, but it also bolts us to sin faster than ever. It's almost as if it makes us into a magnet with a positive and negative pole. We can get the best parts out of the magnet if we get everything aligned, and we get the absolute worst if we don't get them aligned. Make sense? Let's go starting out at the very, very top, because this is the one that I want you to take. This is the reason I jumped to number 5 first, for perspective's sake. David Holtz is a person that Franklin Graham referenced in his article, who's an AI thinker. And he said we will have about 1 billion humanoid robots by 2040. So expectations are at the Earth, the population of the Earth at that time will probably be the same as now. We have many countries that are going up, but we have way too many countries that are going down. The birth rate, like if it wasn't for Mormons and immigration, the United States would have less and less people every year. We know this. South Korea, same way. Japan is down to, for every 100 people in Japan today, there will be a total of 4.5 in the year 2100. They're having more population drop because people are not having children and getting married than any plague, any war that has ever happened in that country. It is epidemic.
If you're straight.
If it's
And what's driving that?
lack of reproduction.
pursuits.
birth rates.
Yeah, I never was driving that.
Exactly. Is it the government driving that, or is it health?
We can go all over the place and we can be on this one for the rest of the afternoon. But my point to you is globally, it's expected that the world's population will be relatively flat.
Okay. Okay.
But the number of robots is going to go to a knucklehead spot. And it says here by 2060, remember, these are humanoid robots, which means they're either going to look like us or act like us, one of the two. Humanoid robots will reach 100 billion by 2060. So if 100 billion. So for each of you, for each of me, there'll be 12 others out there like me who aren't human. Just for perspective's sake.
We are starting in trouble. No, I'm just
Now, so this is good that he went down that path, because at first presentation, technology should and does create fear, right? When Scott and I had a conversation about this beforehand, when nuclear weaponry was introduced to the world, care of World War II, for something like 20 or 30 years, every school district in the United States had drills that the students would have to do where they would go under their desks and cover their heads and stuff like that, just in case of a nuclear war or just in case of fallout. Now, the truth was they just needed us all in one place so they could find us after the bomb went off, right? That was kind of what they were doing, threw into the basement, if we kind of get honest with it. But that was all fear-based, so we never used it. We don't have those drills anymore. But for a period of time, that sort of feel for reaction was par for the human race, right? My kids never had to crawl under the desk and put your hands over your head in case there's a large flash of light outside and you know the world's about to end as we know it. My kids never went through that drill. Right? I did. I remember learning about it. We had to watch an 8mm video. Scott's nodding his head. Bill's nodding his head about why we're doing this crazy drill. That's the norm for the human race. We fear technology upon first introduction. So I'm giving you that story. Perhaps when you meet somebody older who's opposed to AI before you get the first word out, perhaps you can remind them of their nuclear fallout drills that they did back in the 70s and 60s that we don't do anymore.
And the different applications of nuclear technology today.
Yeah, medicine is driven by nuclear technology today in so many ways. All right, so let's jump to question number 2, because this is where your credibility is on the line. And the question is, how are AI and human IQ the same, and how are they different? So when you think of AI, intelligence doing whatever you think intelligence does, what is it that a machine does that you and I do that's the same? What does a machine do that you and I do that's the same?
process information.
We got 1, we have compute, which means we take I/O and take input-output and judge or manipulate. What else are we do that's the same?
We consider options or outcomes.
Yeah, decision trees. What else?
Do math.
Yeah,
Calculate.
manipulate data.
Good.
How about this? How about this?
Make error.
You don't think about any of those things yet.
Before we started here, I gave Phil this story, and I'll share it with you guys now. I took the time to read the report about the Uber that killed somebody in Tempe, Arizona. And I wanted to know what could have happened that caused it. Now, obviously, these self-driving Ubers that I'm discussing here, their rate of incident is much reduced to the human. But they still screw up now and then, and people will say, well, there's your reason not to do it, right? There's your reason not to do it. So I'm going to give you that story, and then I'm going to jump to seatbelts. So it was the fall, and there was an awful lot of leaves flying around in the air in Tempe, Arizona, because they were falling off the trees. So the car was getting a lot of false positives because it had an algorithm that says, if you see moving objects and they happen to be a color that matches a color that people have in their clothing, react. And so it would see the moving brown and the car would stop. You know, the wind would come by, the car would be going, some leaves would blow across the road and the car would stop. After enough of these false positives, the algorithm inside of the Uber software says, if you get a lot of false positives, stop treating it as real. It's like if it's a lot of crying wolf, don't take it as real. So the algorithm started saying, moving brown objects don't count. Guy with a brown shirt crosses the street, dead.
Coach.
Easy fix, change the algorithm. You know, it was an easy fix. But we asked it to learn. We said, learn from your mistakes. You kept going down the road and stopping. Going down the road and stopping because leaves were going through the air. The algorithm, we said, it says, what's making you stop? Moving brown objects. So let's stop reacting to moving brown objects. And oh, by the way, somebody died. Pretty logical outcome, wouldn't you say? That kind of thing. But I know all about it. And now you know all about it. And it was a one-time only event. And a whole bunch of us are going to make our decisions based on this one-time event and discard the billions of miles that have been driven by Uber ever since then.
Exactly.
Do we as a society say that one person is like the lost sheep that Christ talked about that he went after, and we should do everything to save the one? Or do we say what's best for the many is what we should pursue? That's a great question for you to have with people in business, because you'll learn a lot about them as you hear how they choose to answer that. Go ahead.
Well, that guy across the road, he's got some culpability to this too. Because why wouldn't you look and see a car coming?
I know.
So they're blaming it on the car, but the guy should have stopped.
Well, keep in mind that the go-to-market strategy with people has to have a safety component to it, because you get thrown under the bus, no pun intended, if you don't create safe products, right? If I sell a gun and I say it only blows up in your face 1 in 10,000 times, you're going to say, I'm not buying that gun, among other things, and all that goes with it. So let's take this to another place in our past called seatbelts. So when seatbelts were introduced, it was pressed hard as a safety measure. Evidence was presented to political leaders that stated without any controversy, somebody dies every day because they wore a seatbelt. Not because they didn't, it's because they did. It went under a bridge, couldn't get out, went into a river, couldn't get it off, car caught on fire, they couldn't unclip. First responders arrived after a car gets hit both front and back, and they can't pull them out. Every day somebody died because of a seatbelt. What happened? They looked at it. Seatbelts are the law everywhere. They said, okay, one person dies a day, good enough. We're going to save the 4,500 instead. You can't go into a driver's ed class and say, well, seatbelts are sort of helpful, and get away with it if you're a teacher. We've decided as a society that those thousands per day that are saved are worth losing the one a day. Right? So keep in mind that debate took 10 years. Reagan ran for office years ago with the promise of unwinding the seatbelt laws because people hated clipping in. Do your own Google on this one. People hated clipping in. And he said, we're not going to take freedom from Americans. If you don't want to clip in your own car, then don't clip in. It's your car. You want me to walk into your kitchen and tell you which pot to use to make spaghetti? Heck no. He went to market to win votes, fighting the very law that we now consider to be a statement of fact. You put on seatbelts if you're considered to be a safe driver, and if you don't have a seatbelt on, it's your fault. That's like every judge in the country, every insurance claim, every insurance adjuster would agree with what I just said. So there's some history here about seatbelts that should help you point back to the finger that says AI will cause pain. AI will hurt people, but not most. And we had this debate. It went all the way to the president, just like it's going all the way to the top echelons of society. Comments, anybody?
Greater good is what you're talking about.
Correct. Go ahead.
I got a question about the programming. So, obviously, us as human beings, we have programming that we bring to every conversation, right? And if that programming gets skewed, then the lens of which we view situations through sometimes can be skewed as well. And I'm just wondering how, the AI, I know somebody mentioned Google was under fire for, the woke thing. So I guess if there's, how much evidence is there that the AI technology has negative programming and just we do as human beings.
So what we do with AI is we tell it what to look at. It doesn't see everything. It only tells us who sees what we tell it to. And then we tell it how to use that information to make a decision, right? If like your hand naturally has AI, a real intelligence in it, if your hand's on a hot stove, no one needs to tell you to pull it off. It's a reaction. Now you might hit your face when you do it. You might back and hit somebody in the face when you bring your elbow back quickly, but you're trying to protect your hand. AI has that same sort of thinking going on. We're going to say, here's my inputs. If you see these inputs, take this into consideration. And here's some high-level parameters, but we want you to learn. So if you do this thing that I told you to do and it doesn't work, stop doing it, which is the case of the brown leaves and a brown shirt in Tempe, Arizona, and the driverless Uber on steroids. You're nodding your head. Not quite the answer you're looking for here. But let's talk about your how you view things going into it. So I'm reading a book now, and the guy tells a story about the different ways cultures treat exactly one sentence, all English-speaking languages. The phrase is, that is a good dog, right? In the United States, that means it's not going to go crap on the side of the road. You're going to be able to clean it up in your back lot. If you said, that is a good dog, and you said that's what you meant by it, people get it. You go to Australia and say, that is a good dog. That means he's doing more work than you're having to feed him in dog food. He's taking care of the sheep, he's rounding up the cattle, whatever he's asking to do, he's a working dog. If I go to some of the tribes in Sri Lanka and say, that is a good dog, that means that with a little bit of mustard oil, salt, pepper, and some onions, that tastes really good. Each culture has the same phraseology with distinctly different meanings. That is a good dog can mean some very different things. So, what are we bringing to the table?
And to me, if you said that is a good dog, it's a dog that ain't gonna bite me.
Right.
That's another possibility. The whole idea that you might bite into him,
stories out visiting.
that you might bite into him,
Their
doesn't
dogs
go
bite
into your
me.
algorithm.
That's his delivery, right?
All right, let's tackle this idea that let's tackle the top one here and then go down and go. There's one associated with the top one here. And let's talk about what happens when we take these things too far. So there's a story in the Bible, and this is number 3, that has a lot in common with the development of AI, and that we're using intellect to attempt replace humanity. What biblical story is that?
Is that
The Babel. It's the Tower of Babel, right? We tried to reach places beyond where we were meant to go. And we were attempting to replace ourselves.
But there's so many stories. Abraham and Hagar is another story of that. And Cain and Abel is another story of that. And there's many, many stories of how we want to usurp the power of God in our lives. That's what you're talking about.
Well, this is one where we're trying to grow up and out of our own humanity. We were trying to reach to God to be like Him.
Okay.
So in the Cain and Abel story, they still dwelled where they did before and after. Babel has a fundamental idea that we're going to dwell above where God asked us to, or where He put us.
Well, you go back further, go to Adam and Eve. Eve
Yep.
was tempted to go, I could be above God. I could be like God if I eat from this tree. Wait and see. He goes, yeah, sure.
So I brought out the Hebrew, because you guys knew I was going to do that, and I had a quote from Genesis. I printed it out here in English and Hebrew for some of you guys. It's on Genesis 1, verse 26, and it says, God said, let us make man in our image. And so in Hebrew, it has it right there, Vayomer Elohim, so it means, and God said, so on and so forth, but it says, in our image. The word for image is Salem. So Winston,
So,
the image of Winston. That's what that name of that city means. So when you make something in God's image, you'd say Tselem Adonai, image of God, right? Notice it says B'Tselem, which means in the image, but afterwards it says in its likeness, and it says, I don't have my goggles on. It says Kidmutenu. That phrase "nu" at the end means our. But you heard me probably say the little phrase ki at the beginning. Ki is a prefix in Hebrew that basically means kind of, sort of, but watered down. So it says, we will make God in our image and our likeness, but it's watered down. It's really not tselem, it's ki tselem. So it's watered down. So you might say that this is a watered down version of a laser. It's got the size and shape. It makes marks if you point it at things and move it, but it's not cutting through steel if you increase the wattage.
But it's still poke your eye out.
It still can poke your eye out. Fair enough. So that translation of Genesis 1:26 says, "Let us make man quasi like us," sort of, but not really. A couple of photocopies over, and then let them have dominion. So let's jump here to this phraseology, dominion, and then let's go to salvation. So there's a character in the Old Testament whose name is salvation, and his name is?
Jesus.
No, Old Testament.
Old Testament. Salvation.
Is related in his name. Is your son's name perhaps?
Joshua. Yes.
Yeah, Joshua. Notice the end, Shua at the end. In the New Testament, what's the name of the guy who actually was our salvation?
Jesus.
Yeshua.
Shapiro.
What's the word for dominion? Beshua. So there's a transition going on here. God says, I'm giving you dominion. Then I'm going to hand you salvation. And then I'm going to have the person who gives you salvation. There's always this shua at the end of the flow of it orally right here. So the concept that he wants us, that dominion and salvation are interrelated, we generally don't know how to teach because we're not connecting back to original language that goes with that. But that should be something you ruminate upon because it's one of the mysteries of the Old Testament that we miss out on. And I hope you guys, when you do Genesis, Bill, you hit the whole Beshua, Yeshua, Yoshua. We won't hear Yeshua, but you're going to hear the concept of salvation and dominion repeatedly in that study. Chapter 1, nonetheless.
Good.
If you get there. So, the Wally story, and Scott talked about laziness to a certain extent. We are now going to talk about number 4. It says, humans have intrinsic blank, where this attribute cannot be given to a machine. So humans have this innate ability to say, why am I here? Or question their own existence, where this attribute cannot be given to a machine. Some people say it means they have the ability to see the existence of God or see the existence of a creator. But either way, they have this ability to look and ask a question about who they are that a machine can never do. As such, humans are the only one of the two capable of blank. This is one perhaps going to take me a stretch for you to see, and it's the word worship.
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 I thought empathy.
Machines could perhaps be taught how to sense your feelings.
Okay.
But worship, this idea that I am not my own creator, and he who created me is greater than I. And that concept a machine does not have the ability to get because it can't sense itself's own existence.
Where does reason come in?
Okay.
But tell me where you think reason comes in.
Well, I mean, we can reason why we should worship.
Be grateful?
Yep, by using our past experiences, what we read in the Word. Reason that is the Word is God's. Is it God's Word? Is it inerrant, or is it like mythology? As in, we were talking about that last night. It's we were talking about putting AI with Scripture and doing these arguments and. So yeah, I think reason is probably the biggest thing is we are the only ones that can reason.
So when you say reason, what separates reason from decision making? Like if I'm an AI and I see the temperature in this room is 68, but the thermostat on the wall says turn the air on at 67. What's the reason for me saying?
What's the reasoning there?
Yeah. Why should I turn it on?
Well, that's not a reason. That's logic. That's a pre-programmed logic. Reason is we can take logic and say, well, that's illogical, and here's why. Or we can choose whether to turn the thermostat up or not turn the thermostat up. That is how we can reason and then figure out, okay, I can turn it up because I'm cold, or I can not turn it up because I'm cheap and I don't want to run the air conditioning. So those are.
That's good. I like your answer. I like your answer.
Ian, what did you say the first blank was?
Self-awareness. You could say existence of eternal beginnings and ends, but self-awareness is pretty complete.
What are values in your job?
So when you say a value, talk to me about what differentiates a value from, say, a thermostat setting.
The value would be a principle that I would not violate under any circumstances. So who said that? Oh dear.
So can you give me an example of a value for you? Because I'm thinking of the disparity between the Ten Commandments and our incapacity to do them. I would consider those to be great values. Oh, by the way, I'm incapable of doing that. Or at least I don't have. In 58 years, I haven't shown history of that.
We try to raise a family would be one to be. You know, my work, my relationships with others are not very supersede my concern with them.
I would say that what you just said has probably been taken into account and thought about 100,000 times in the last couple of years by people who've thought about AI, and they try to figure out, what can I do? You know, one of the things that when I was looking up disparities in AI, I found myself finding a lot of videos about those little portable AI-powered vacuums that are bumping into things and making decisions about where to vacuum, and how they keep getting cattails. Cats get caught up in those things, or a dog starts sniffing it. Next thing you know, the nose is stuck in there. And then the machine is taught, once I hear sounds of a certain frequency, that means a pet has been caught. And that's really important, so shut down at that, because they know what a dog bark volume's at and know how a cat can hiss. But
So you leave the cat in there.
So my son was on the 6th floor, and I said, you got to be careful not to leave the patio door open, because his robot would go out, may go out the door, and
it's a robo vacuum. So Bill, you're on the cusp of what I would say is the leading edge of the technology. And how do I take something like a value, a very high level thing for apps for which that could apply to every parameter at all times, and have that override these other parameters?
Values are subjective. I mean, what one person's value might say, hey, listen, drinking and promiscuity is okay with me. And another person would say, it's not, and I've got proof here, it's written in the Word, in God's Word. Well, I don't believe in God's Word. So those are all subjective in values, but they're vital for us to have an organized society.
So the list of values in the Ten Commandments, do you believe those are subjectively agreeable? You think people would say that, no, that's not correct?
There
That's
are
an
some
opinion?
people that will say that those are subjective. First of all, you have to, the very first one, there's a lot of people that just can't get around that. There is no God. There's no such thing as God. Mm-hmm. So, that's where it becomes subjective. Wait a minute, no, there is. And I can prove, I can prove he doesn't. So, I mean, those are some of the things. I think values are, they're essential for us to have an organized and well society, or just a society that is.
And God said the Ten Commandments are those values.
Right.
So I read an article yesterday, and the title was "The Death for the End of the Nuclear Family," and then in parentheses, "and good riddance." And wow, I read this like a 10-page article about
That we're better off not having a nuclear
We're
family?
better off, and everything's changing, and it's probably for the good. There's single parents, and there's grandparents raising children, and things like that, and just the dads aren't there. And they went through all that, and then they made it positive. The author made an argument that it was a good thing. Of course, they're from New York, so that makes a lot of sense.
That was the
But I'm like, this just offends me. This is against everything that I believe in.
Yeah, it's the concept of it takes a village to raise
Well,
a
exactly.
raise an idiot.
And that's, but it's a contrary belief and ideology to everybody in this room's ideology and worldview of a biblical worldview, right? And we can't relate to that. It's hard for us to relate to another's, but this guy was just as adamant about that as I am about what I believe. And you can't discount that. So it's all in this AI. Whoever writes the AI programming is going to dictate that.
Let's go to number 6, because you just hit the idea of AI programming. It says, today, AI is not self-generating. Humans organize and create AI devices.
That's dangerous, yeah.
The ultimate fear, and this is where Hollywood goes to town, is that one day blank.
they will roll.
Donald Trump's going to write all the AI.
It's the idea that we will lose control.
Right, to a certain.
The Terminator movies series took off because it was the battle against how we get back control once we've given it to the AI. Arnold Schwarzenegger became a literally global name because of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
He took that and leapfrogged to become a governor. Granted, it was California, but he still became a governor. You know, California's the 7th biggest economy in the world.
Wow.
That's quite a statement from going from Hollywood's loss of control and taking back control virtually to trying to do it to the world's 7th biggest economy. I mean, you guys, I don't know if it's funny, but it's not. I mean, that meant this one character was able to take back an economy bigger than all of Italy.
And I saw an interview about that. He really wanted to play the other guy's part.
Oh, no kidding. Did he really?
He really, but the director was like, he's like, I don't want to play a machine. There's nothing interesting about a machine, But they finally convinced him, and of course it changed everything for him.
All right, so I gave you one that I thought would help you if you're dealing with an atheist. And I'm going back to Ecclesiastes, since you guys know I find that to be the most applicable book in the Old Testament for teaching how to be ethical in business. And in Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, the author, says, blank, how do we apply that when we are approached and asked to explain that something no one has ever seen before? So the idea here is, Kohelet's words are, there is nothing new under the sun, which means since the times of Genesis, there is nothing new, including man-made things. So when somebody approaches you and perhaps challenges the Bible or the words saying it's inherent and so on and so forth, it says, there's nothing new under the sun. Explain that robotic thing here, or explain the 1040 tax return. He said there's nothing new under the sun. There's no reference to 1040s or tax returns. So the question is what is your response to that? And here's the thing that I'd like you to ruminate upon. I already had this conversation with Phil, which is helping right here. What we're talking specifically about are sins. And there is nothing new that's under some sort of new guise care of technology. The ultimate concerns that we still have are selfishness, idolatry, pride, and all these tools, AI and everything like that, it's just covering them in a new layer that perhaps we haven't seen before. If I think through what AI can do in letter writing, like if I was a business owner and I needed to create 1,000 leads in them, I said, my firm will create 1,000 leads for you in a month with using AI. Well, they basically take on your persona and your language, and they send out emails that you don't even know are happening, or they're sending out LinkedIn requests that you don't even know you're doing, and people are replying to you and they think they're really talking to you because it looks and sounds and smells like you. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there about lying. There's a whole lot of stuff going in there about pride. You're literally exploiting, you're taking advantage of people because you're not even getting to know them. You're just taking from them. There's a lot of stuff that AI is going to kind of cover up in the name of simplicity, profitability, fill in the blank with whatever you'd like to, but keep in mind, it's ultimately this idolatry issue of how can I get my share of the money? How can I get my share of the pie?
Easy.
And how can I take advantage and do things like that? And just, if somebody gets injured along the way, well, I just don't see it anymore. It's a tough one to think through to the extent.
So what's supposed to be on the blank?
So there's nothing under, the Colette says there is nothing new under the sun.
Oh, I see.
So I looked up that word Colette.
Kohelet, yeah. Teacher.
It says teacher, but it also has a meditation. It's the meditations of a teacher to prepare.
The words of Kohelet is what it says.
Okay, very good.
The words of the meditating teacher, which we equate to be Solomon.
There you go.
Yep.
That's cool you looked that up.
Yeah.
The last question I have on this list here for you is what is making AI labeled as a threat in lines with Y2K? So let's do the Y2K. I'm going to do the Big Pen story. Now, you guys, I emailed this to you, so I don't know if you read it or not. I sent you a link on the Big Pens last night. But it's this idea that jumped forward into our education space from technology. So for the history of the human race, when students would go to school, there was an expectation that they would prepare themselves. They would eat in the mornings. Perhaps they would eat when they got to school, something like that. But one of the things all students had to do was bring with them something to write with. Somebody really wants to talk to you today, huh?
They do. It's the same person suspected spam.
Yeah, it's this idea that they had to bring something to write with. So every child, and then this goes all the way back from ancient Israel all the way up to the 20th century in our country, had to bring with them an ink pen, perhaps a backup ink pen, and ink. Now the ink was generally a powder, sometimes it was a liquid, and the kids would have to make the ink in a little jar, water fountains, whatever, and they could stir it up and they have to fill their pens. So little kids would come home with their hands covered in ink all the time for most of the history of the human race. And if a child came to school without an ink pen, that was shame for the whole family. That meant the mom wasn't preparing their kid to go to school. They weren't cared with the kid's outcome. Everybody fundamentally understood that if they didn't have a pen, they couldn't participate. So a French company named Bic created something called the disposable ink pen. And they priced it so that it was just ridiculously cheap, and they sold them in 10 packs. Well, the United States Department of Education people, this was pre-Department of Education, but a lot of important people within the United States said, these pens are evil and will bring about the number of the beast. This will cause the end, because now we're going to tell kids you don't need to pray to come to school. Just show up and ask the teacher for a 10-cent pen and you're good. And when you're done with the day, you can just throw it out. You don't have to take care of it. The most important thing you learn how to use, we're going to make that into a commodity, right? It's disposable. They thought it was going to lead to additional prostitution. They thought, yeah, if you start making a very critical thing in your life disposable at this age, when you hit puberty, certainly women will be the same way.
Wow.
So the level of thought that was projected as to what was going to happen by allowing Bic pens in schools was crazy. There were multiple school districts that says, thou shalt not have Bic pens at so-and-so high school. They were not going to allow that. Kids needed to prepare to come there. They needed to be ready. So if you go to Bic's Pens website, they got a Wikipedia page. They've said that they've currently made 60 billion pens. Well, the world's got a population of 8 billion. There's a lot of people who have no idea what I'm talking about. But if they did, that means everybody in the world has used 7 Bic pens in their life. There's a lot of people who don't even have a change of clothes, and they think they've had their 7 Bic pens. Guess what's happened since then? Microsoft, Google, General Motors, Ford, Facebook, Cisco Systems. I mean, how many names do I have to create that showed that the lack of having a ballpoint pen did not, in fact, impede creativity and progress as that was anticipated to make? So the Bic pen, literally, if you tell the story, most people will laugh at you, they won't believe you, whatever. Was it you that looked it up on Wikipedia to see the history of the Bic pen?
Yeah.
It's a lunacy thing, but it's fading from culture.
It was from a Swiss watchmaker. The technology came from a Swiss watchmaker to make the little ball, and it's I mean, it's just fascinating on it. But the other thing too is foster creativity, remove creativity. Every person who's had a big pen knows that it was the perfect stealth pea shooter. You can basically pull that cap off, pull that thing out, stick that by it, boom, blow it, and reassemble it and say, who did that?
Well, was the resistance help bring about? Because when you say school, what came to my mind was number 2 pencils. That's what most of the kids had to have when I was in school growing up. Number 2 pencils. So I was wondering if that was part of the resistance to the big pen.
Could have been. I haven't thought about it. That's a possibility. So the ultimate concern with AI, and I need to go in and take lunch out of the oven kind of quick, is that there's a very few number of people who know actually what's happening today. Just when you say AI today, most people are going to conclude ChatGPT or some of the alternatives to ChatGPT. I told Phil Blunt yesterday, I mentioned him one called Llama number 2. Most people don't have any idea what I just said, but that's a ChatGPT competitor. And there's tools you can now use where you can, and Phil and I did it last night, where you can take something and put it in this tool and hit click, and it'll tell you whether or not AI made it or not, or what the likelihood it is that AI made it or not. So you can tell whether or not somebody's real or if they're a phony baloney person. So we already have the counterfeit AI detectors that are going on out there.
And we did a test last night. I created something that was 100% generated by Google Bard, okay? And I put it in that thing, and it said, we are relatively sure this was written by a human. It was 54% human, 45%
AI.
AI.
So the AI is fooling the AI.
Yeah.
That's where we're at today. So here's my story to you guys. Just like automobile manufacturing, right? Very few people know what's actually going on. There's a handful of people who are involved with all the decision making, and AI is not that much different. And because of that, people are going to be scared and concerned, and they're going to want to meddle with it. As time passes and AI becomes more commonplace, and young kids in China and India and Brooklyn, New York start creating algorithms that change the world, that will die down. But as of today, if you think about who is AI and what is AI and who's doing stuff with AI, for the most part, it's your huge tech companies for which you don't have any idea what it is they're actually doing. So just give it this a little bit of time to span out to the rest of the human race, and all will be quiet on the Western Front.